Hello everyone, and welcome to our online lecture for Bio 1. Today we're going to be continuing on with our different sections of organismal biology, where we take apart all of the different components of animals to understand how they function on a cellular level. Today we're going to be talking about nutrition. And ultimately, nutrition relies on digestion. And digestion is the way in which we're able to take in food and break it down to its monomer components, because ultimately our cells cannot take in large polymers. We need to break them down into their monomers. And then absorbs these different nutrients and sources of calories and eliminates any wastes. And so this introduces the four first terms that are going to encompass our entire process of digestion. First, ingestion, the process of bringing in or eating the food. This is central to all animals because animals as a kingdom, a phylogenetic kingdom, are defined by the fact that they bring their food into the body and will begin to digest after ingestion. And the digestion process is actually how we break down that food from its polymers to its monomers. And keep in mind that the cofactor needed in all of this digestion in the process of hydrolysis is water. After these sources of food have been digested, they need to be absorbed or taken into cells. And we'll talk about how different nutrients need to be absorbed in different ways. And then finally, any byproducts that cannot be taken in need to be eliminated. And that means pushed away through waste. Now, you'll also be familiar with some of these other terms that we'll throw around a fair bit today. In terms of digestive variance, we know that some animals are herbivores, or they specialize on eating plant matter. And this, of course, raises challenges for these organisms because plants have a lot of deterrents to being ingested. The name of the game with most plants is not to poison you when you eat them, but rather to slow you down. You cannot eat me as fast as I can grow. There are specific components of the digestive system of herbivores that will be very, very different from the digestive system of animals that eat meat or other animals, these being our carnivores. And then, of course, we have some organisms that are opportunists, like ourselves, that eat both plants and animals, called omnivores. Now, in each of these digestive variants that are found within the organisms that have a spine, the motion of pushing food through the digestive system occurs through the smooth muscle contractions called peristalsis. Now, in peristalsis, you will get a clump of food that has muscle contractions behind it to push it forward. The muscle itself, the feeding tube, or depending on where it is in the digestive system, it can be in the intestines or heading down the esophagus. The muscles will actually be pinching in somewhat the whole way down so that way food does not move very quickly. Gravity never controls the movement of food. The muscles are holding it in place with a special pinch towards the back to help move it forward. And in this way, food can progress down the digestive system. And ideally, the digestive system is long enough in order for all 4 steps to occur in it: the ingestion, the digestion, the absorption, and the elimination. This is consistent, as I mentioned, for all vertebrate organisms. These are all organisms that have a spine. So now, I do not expect you to have this tree of life down. This is what we'll be covering for a fair bit of Bio 2. But you can see, as a sneak peek, here you've got a lot of your fish and their friends. Of course, organisms that ingest their food and ultimately eliminate it. You've got your amphibians right here. This is your clade that is all of your reptiles. We'll be talking specifically about bird digestive systems here, and birds are, of course, descendants of the dinosaurs. Your mammal lineages begin here. And of the mammals that we'll be talking about, we'll look specifically at humans, or us, at a rabbit digestive system, and, forgot to note this one, a goat digestive system, and we'll talk very briefly about the cat digestive system because they are carnivores. It's important to keep in mind that all of these organisms share common ancestry. At some point in the very, very distant past, we can trace ourselves back to some common ancestor. But what you will notice is that there is more similarity between organisms that share more recent ancestry, like, say, us and rabbits, or us and rabbits and goats, as compared to the digestive system of birds. Few more steps, just a few more years in between the two of them. And so when we're going over these digestive systems, I want you to keep that in mind. Now, there is another group of animals that we're not going to be covering here. These are our invertebrates, or organisms that do not have a spine. And in general, there are 2 different models here. One that will be familiar to you, those invertebrates that have an alimentary canal. These have 2 openings for a mouth and an anus. And then you have the very confusing organisms, the flatworms, that have 1 opening. In flatworms, or Platyhelminthes, the mouth and the anus are the same orifice. Food travels in a closed circuit. They have a gastrovascular cavity rather than a complete canal. Let's hope that these organisms do not have taste buds, because I certainly would not want my mouth and my anus to be the same opening. Now, when we're talking about these different digestive systems, we can break them down into a couple different groups. Within the vertebrates, you'll notice that some have a monogastric digestive system. This means that their stomach has 1 chamber. So it's not true that organisms have multiple stomachs. They instead have multiple chambers to their stomachs. We also have the ruminants. These are organisms that have multi-chamber stomachs. Now, ruminants with their multi-chamber stomachs specialize on being herbivores, because they need different chambers of the stomach to digest cellulose, to get calories from something that other organisms do not. Additionally, ruminants also lack upper teeth And this is an adaptation that we believe allows them to tear food away, rather than having to continually gnash on 2 layers of teeth. The food is torn between the gums and the tongue. And we'll talk about their other chambers in a moment. So, let's take a look at our human digestive system first, name the components, and talk about what major processes are happening in each component. So, let's get to our human digestive system. So, these images are taken from your textbook, but I've blanked out the different primary components in black here. So, the textbook does not begin with your mouth, but the oral cavity is first. Ooh, change the size of my pointer there. The oral cavity, or your mouth, is first. After the oral cavity, food is pushed via peristalsis down the esophagus. The esophagus is not to be confused with your trachea. The esophagus is your food pipe. The trachea is your windpipe, your air pipe. When traveling down the esophagus via peristalsis, again, with the help of muscles that prevent gravity from taking over the direction of the food, food will eventually get pushed into the stomach. Now, in the stomach, you will find tons of acid. In this acidic environment, we have the digestion taking place. Now, after food has been digested down, you will encounter the small intestine, where a lot of our nutrients are ingested. Nutrient absorption, my apologies. Traveling down the small intestine and its 3 individual components, I'll talk about a bit later, we eventually get to the water-absorbing large intestine and the vestigial organ of our cecum. So this is a vestigial component that we do not use anymore, but you will see it used in other organisms. And then we have water absorption occurring in the large intestine. Elimination will occur in the anus. So that's where we get rid of our food, via poop. There are 2 major auxiliary organs that the food does not directly come in contact with, but that contribute digestive enzymes to the digestive process, or additionally contribute enzymes or hormones into the bloodstream to help deal with the downstream effects of digestion. These are the largest organ in your body, your liver, and the associated gallbladder. And then the thin membranous organ on the underside of your stomach, your pancreas. We'll talk about the different enzymes and hormones that they make in a little bit. Now we will see a very similar blueprint within our rabbit. We of course know that they do have their oral cavity, defined by those very cute 2 front teeth that in lagomorphs like rabbits do continue to grow, therefore rabbits must do their chewing, similar to rodents. Once food escapes the oral cavity, it then goes down into the esophagus, where it lands in the stomach. Of course, there are those 2 auxiliary organs, the liver with the gallbladder and the pancreas underneath the stomach. Absorption of nutrients will again occur in the small intestine, but rather than having a small cecum, rabbits have a very extended cecum with a colon, or large intestine, and anus afterwards. Now, the cecum itself is critical to rabbit digestion because these things eat a fair bit of vegetative food, and in the cecum itself, you find a large bacteria pocket. That's the whole purpose of this whole stretch. Now, this bacterial pocket in the cecum is actually helping the rabbit break down cellulosic food. And rabbits won't actually be able to get all their nutrients by digesting their food once. So oftentimes, and those of you with rabbits may know this, is after the first time running through their food, rabbits will eat their excrement and send it through another time to fully get those calories through. Because again, most of the absorption is happening in the small intestine, but the cellulosic breakdown's occurring in the cecum after the small intestine. So you have to run it back a second time to make sure that you're getting all that you can out of your food. Kind of gross, but hey, it works for them. You will notice a difference in the consistency between food that has been run through once versus twice, because cellulose in our diet is known as fiber. And when you break down the fiber, it will look very different the second time through. And again, because rabbits and humans share more recent ancestry, we see that most of these structures are very similar. Contrast this with our chicken, our bird. A very different digestive system here. Now in the chicken, we still have an esophagus after the oral cavity, but in the oral cavity of humans and rabbits, you have teeth that help with mechanical digestion. Now, the chicken does not have teeth to begin chewing the food. Instead, there has to be a couple of extra stages in their digestive process. From the esophagus, food will land in the crop, not the stomach. The crop itself stores the food, and in the crop, you'll begin to have some of the digestion. After the crop itself, you have the proventriculus. In the proventriculus, you have acid being thrown onto the food. So you have some mechanical digestion in the crop, and then acid being thrown on it, and then you have more mechanical digestion being thrown in the gizzard. And in the gizzard, you have things like rocks and small pebbles or other mechanically assisting objects that help this organism be able to, quote unquote, chew its food. So this is not a monogastric system, but a two-gastric system or a digastric system. Now, just like our other organisms, we have these adjacent organs like the liver and the pancreas. Now keep in mind that because we are not a monogastric system where there's a single stomach, the pancreas lays adjacent to the gizzard, which is that last layer of mechanical digestion. And after the gizzard, we have the absorption occurring again in absorption happening in the small intestine. Sorry for the brain lapse on the spelling there. Totally forgot how to spell absorb. And then we again have the seisae, two chambers that are again mostly vestigial, not in use. but those bacterial pockets, those organs are still there. A large intestine after them with a cloaca rather than an anus. And the difference then with a cloaca compared to the anus is that the cloaca is the union of the union of the exit for the urinary tract, the digestive system, and the reproductive canal. So you pee, poop, and reproduce through the cloaca. Yikes. So again, birds are quite distantly related, so we see some major differences, namely that cloaca and the crop gizzard proventriculus system, but we still see absorption occurring in the small intestine, water reabsorption occurring during the large intestine, and then the auxiliary organs of the liver and pancreas here. Now compare this to the quite complex digestive system of our ruminants, these multi-chambered, stomached vertebrae. Now just like us, they have an anus rather than a cloaca, and just like all three of the previous organisms, they have an esophagus. But their esophagus will travel to a couple of different possible chambers. In general, grasses and other foods are first placed in the rumen. From the rumen, they will go into the repeatable stomach, the reticulum. Once digestion is sufficiently complete from the reticulum, they will go to the amasum, step 3. And then finally from the amasum, they will get to the acidic chamber called the abomasum. And so these 3 precursor chambers allow for the fermentation of cellulose. Which is essential because these organisms are primarily eating things that have a lot of cellulose. They need to ferment their food. They need to break it down with the assistance of bacteria. Now, fermentation is a very gassy process. And it's not that cows have just this really bad rate of producing flatulence because that's the way they are, but rather because of the food that they eat. They ferment within their digestive system, and that causes the production of a ton of gas. So yes, indeed, cow farts are a large contributor to greenhouse gases because of the type of gas produced, that methane that's produced. Now, after this 4-chambered stomach, going from the rumen, the reticulum, the amasum to the abomasum, after the acid's done its work to break down all the proteins, we then of course encounter our small intestine, where nutrients are absorbed, and our large intestine, where water is reabsorbed. So hopefully you see the similarities between these 4 different types of digestive systems. There are a lot after all. Now, we're going to focus specifically on human digestion and talk about the journey and experiences of a hamburger as it goes through the human digestive system. How do we break down our food? Well, first, in the oral cavity, we have food being mechanically digested with chewing. But there's also chemical digestion occurring in the oral cavity as well. We release 2 major digestive enzymes, salivary amylase, which breaks down our carbohydrates, and lipase, which breaks down fats. If you want proof of the fact that your mouth, you'll begin to break down starches into sugars, try doing this with a saltine cracker. Take a saltine and place it on your tongue for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Allow for the digestive enzymes to break it down. Now, initially, you will taste salt. And as the salt begins to dissipate, you won't taste anything because there's starch. But over time, salivary amylase will begin to break those starch molecules down to glucose, and your tongue will begin to taste the sweet in the cracker. So the cracker should shift from a very, very salty thing at first to an incredibly sweet, like pixie stick, obviously without any of the weird fruit flavoring or coloring, or without the extreme sugar, but you will get a sugary flavor. Now, from the oral cavity, we hit the esophagus. And here, of course, we have peristalsis, moving food down, but notably, in humans, at the bottom of the esophagus, there is no sphincter or round muscle to keep the stomach closed. Food will readily go in whenever it gets there. What does this mean for humans? Well, it means that acid from the stomach can bounce up into the esophagus. And when it does, we experience acid reflux. So there's no muscle controlling exact entry into the stomach. This will be different on the other side of the stomach. Once food has entered the stomach, we then begin the major step of digestion. The stomach is a fantastic organ because it is originally very small, but it can grow up to 20 times in size to hold food. Now, likely this is an adaptation because it's not very often that carnivores happen to encounter a lot of meat and might need to move along after getting their fill. So our stomach is made to hold much more than it originally looks like based on its size. We might need to dine and dash in case a lion's coming shortly thereafter. Now, the stomach itself has two different cell types that define it more than any others. The first are the chief cells. It's supposed to be an F. And the second are the parietal cells. These two work hand in hand. The chief cells produce an enzyme called pepsinogen. And pepsinogen, when exposed to hydrochloric acid, will break down and form something called pepsin. Now, this form, pepsin, is a protein designed to break down other proteins. I guess I shouldn't write eats. It's more accurately chomp other proteins. And so you get the origin of pepsinogen coming from our chief cells. They're always making pepsinogen. It's specifically made in this cell, and the presence of pepsin will cause a positive feedback loop whereby pepsin causes more pepsinogen to be made, and more pepsin causes more pepsinogen. Your stomach ramps up its ability to digest. But you're not going to make hydrochloric acid in the chief cells. That would be incredibly dangerous. Because think about it. If you're inside a cell and you go from a safe version of a protein that does not break down proteins to a protein that starts chomping all the other proteins, that pepsin would start breaking down components of the cell. And you don't want to eat your own cells. You want to eat whatever you just ingested. Therefore, the parietal cells are the source of hydrochloric acid. And it's hydrochloric acid that's going to be secreted into the stomach, and the stomach is lined in mucus to help protect those cells from the acid and the damaging effects of pepsin itself. Now, this breakdown is driven by the hydrolysis of proteins. So again, just like we needed water to break down our carbohydrates, whether it be in our mouth with salivary amylase, or a little bit further down in our small intestine, or fats in our mouth and small intestine, water is necessary for the breakdown of any polymer to its monomer constitutive components. Now, these protections of the stomach that come in the form of inactive pepsinogen in the cells, and of course that mucus lining, help prevent you from digesting yourself. But of course, it is possible to have a gap in that lining. Now, when that kind of gap does occur, you will actually create an open wound in the stomach. And ulcers are open wounds in the stomach. These wounds are infected by the bacteria H. pylori. They're specific in the stomach and can be quite painful and difficult to heal. Now, H. pylori gets its name from the fact that they occur before the pyloric sphincter, or the sphincter that controls movement of your digested food, and that digested food is called chyme, into the small intestine. Let's go to add a page here. Now, once the pepsin has broken down all of the proteins, this ball of food, the chyme, will enter the small intestine to wrap up digestion and begin absorption. So the first thing we do is finish digestion. The small intestine is actually broken down into 3 independent parts. Part 1 is our duodenum. And in your duodenum, you're going to start neutralizing the acidic component of the stomach. Because remember, that ball of chyme still has a lot of that hydrochloric acid. And since the duodenum is after the stomach and after that pyloric valve, it's going to bear the brunt of that acid that's present. So therefore, into the duodenum, we release bases to counteract hydrochloric acid. This base comes from the pancreas and is called bicarbonate. So your pancreas is protecting the first part of your small intestine. That's not the only thing your pancreas is doing with your small intestine here. You are also getting a few digestive enzymes. Now, you may know that the pancreas is responsible for the production of a very particular hormone called insulin, which regulates sugar production or sugar content in the bloodstream. And it makes sense that the same organ that's making hormones to regulate sugar in the bloodstream is making the digestive enzymes to break down sugar during digestion. Those enzymes are amylase, maltase, and in some fraction of humans, my favorite, lactase. Shouldn't put an exclamation point after that one, but I do certainly love me some milk and the sugar that is found therein. Now, the duodenum does not only get input from the pancreas. The other organ here that contributes is the liver, but the liver does so through the gallbladder. The gallbladder itself is a temporary holding container for a substance called bile. Bile gets quite a rough name here, but ultimately, bile is a group of salts that can emulsify fat. Emulsification is the process by which molecules can be both hydrophilic and hydrophobic at different ends. And by being both of these, they're able to sequester large chunks of fat and start breaking them up. And once you start breaking up these large polymers into smaller and smaller polymers, you eventually get it to such a small component that it can be brought into your cell or absorbed into your cell. Of course, what's driving the breaking of that large polymer into smaller polymers is, of course, again, hydrolysis. But the duodenum is where we get most of our digestion of non-proteins. The proteins themselves have to be digested with the aid of that very dangerous pepsin. So it's your stomach's role to digest proteins, though the acid that's present in the stomach also does quite a number on all the other macromolecules. But its primary role is for that protein digestion. The duodenum is cleaning up afterwards and helping digest all of the sugars, amylase, maltase, and lactase, thanks to the help of the pancreas, and the fats, thanks to the help of bile, stored in the gallbladder, but made in the liver. Now, after the duodenum, the second component of the digestive system is the jejunum. Here is actually where you're getting the bulk of the digestion. All the chemical digestion. All of these enzymes were put into the duodenum, but they hang out and keep getting moved around so that way things are being broken down and ultimately absorbed. The jejunum is characterized by a lot of hydrolysis. So a lot of water is entering in. And even if you did not drink water with your meal, here is where water is being siphoned from your bloodstream to the jejunum to help with that breakdown. And then towards the tail end of the jejunum, we get the bulk of nutrient absorption. Oops. Now, after the jejunum, we encounter the ileum, the third and final component of the small intestine, whereby we don't want to waste any of those things secreted in, like bile or some of our enzymes, and therefore we get reabsorption, the digestive salts, and then, very importantly, vitamins. And you really want the vitamins that get absorbed here in the ileum. Very critical in this component. Now we're going to take a look at these different sections of the small intestine and the different glands associated with them during the lab portion of this class. But you're also going to take a look at the different ways in which our microvilli and villi help in the absorption of all these nutrients. Because they're lining all of the small intestine. The whole purpose of the microvilli is to increase surface area. We have a diagram of how they look. So the lumen is the space in the small intestine, and of course the small intestine has a lot of blood vessels. And in these blood vessels, you have tons of absorptive cells and capillaries, arteries, and veins running directly adjacent to it. Those capillaries, arteries, and veins are actually what is moving nutrients away. These villi, that themselves are these large stacks with blood vessels, have crenellations or microvilli within each absorptive cell. Now this really maximizes that surface area, so that way you can get the most surface area to increase the rate of absorption that we're seeing. Additionally, as you'll note in the different, as a diagnostic for the different components of the three sections of the small intestine, we have lymphatic vessels that are catching water. And that water can have a lot of stuff in it. More on that during the lab. Another auxiliary organ that's oftentimes overlooked near the ileum because of the presence of that large amount of water that's filled with nutrients. Large amounts of water with nutrients that's warm sounds like a great place for bacteria. And so near the ileum, we have the appendix. And the appendix is an organ that's associated with immunity. I did forget to mention a couple of other enzymes that are made by the pancreas and secreted into the duodenum. Oops. Not only is it making the amylase, maltase, and lactase, but you've also got trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase. Enzymes that break down particular components of proteins. So these three are further protein breakdown. So, again, from the top, food enters the oral cavity, mechanical chewing occurs, chemical digestion occurs with salivary amylase and lipase. Food is pushed down through the esophagus via peristalsis, where in humans there is no sphincter controlling entry into the stomach, therefore we have things like acid reflux. The stomach is lined with chief and parietal cells, chief cells making pepsinogen, that will get converted to pepsin in the presence of hydrochloric acid. Pepsin is a very dangerous protein because it breaks down other proteins. You don't want to make pepsin inside your cells because your cells will start eating yourself. Parietal cells make hydrochloric acid, which helps cleave pepsinogen to make it pepsin. All of this gets transported in a ball of chyme to the small intestine, where we see the completion of digestion and the absorption of nutrients. In the first section of the small intestine, in the duodenum, because it's after the stomach, we get the production of, or the secretion of bicarbonate from the pancreas. The bicarbonate helps neutralize stomach acid, but the pancreas is also releasing enzymes that break down sugars, like amylase, maltase, and lactase, and enzymes that further break down proteins, like trypsin, chymotrypsin, and carboxypeptidase. Additionally, in the duodenum, we get secretions from the liver and the gallbladder because the gallbladder holds the bile, and the bile are just salts that emulsify fat because of their chemical properties of being hydrophilic and hydrophobic. After the duodenum, where all of the components are put in, we get the jejunum, which has the bulk of chemical digestion occurring because this is where lots and lots of hydrolysis is happening. There's tons of water being put into the jejunum, if it's not there already. And then, towards the end of the jejunum, we get the bulk of nutrient absorption. In the ileum, we now have this high nutrient liquid that's hopefully being reabsorbed by our villi and microvilli. But we've also got the reabsorption of our digestive salts from the bile, and then very specific groups of vitamins. And because this is so close to so much of the dangers with digestion, meaning that it's nutrient-rich liquids that are warm, we get the organ associated with immunity here, the appendix. After this water-rich ball has been reabsorbed in the ileum and all the nutrients are out, we're going to get rid of it. But before we get rid of it, we need to reabsorb the water. And that's the entire role of the large intestine. Now, we have, again, so much water in the digestive tract at this point because we needed to perform so much hydrolysis. And I'm sure at some point in your life you've experienced what happens when your body wants to get rid of waste before reabsorbing the water. I think we call that diarrhea. So that is, again, your stomach trying to get rid of something that it feels is toxic or is causing some sort of perturbation in the muscles. So that way peristalsis is pushing all of this through very, very quickly. You try to absorb some nutrients, but again, your duodenum, jejunum, and ileum don't have the time to do all their processes, nor does the large intestine, and therefore water is released through the anal cavity. And in that elimination of waste, we have our non-digestible fibers, like dietary fiber, because we do not have that active cecum with our bacterial pocket to help the fermentation, nor do we have the four-chambered ruminant stomach to help break down those fibers before they reach our small intestine. we have our dietary fibers that actually help in the elimination of waste. Fiber is an essential component of what we eat. It's not something that you can choose not to eat. Your digestive system actually suffers for it. And there are lots of studies that go to show that a lack of dietary fiber in your diet can actually lead to more rapid rates of cancers associated with the digestive system. So please make sure that you are getting your fiber. And that hopefully wraps up our discussion of the different steps associated with digestion. Now there's a little bit more that I want to talk about in regards to absorption of nutrients and human nutrition. This will tie back into our previous discussions about macromolecules, because you know that carbs are the macromolecule that provide you energy. And you know that proteins are the macromolecule that also provide you energy, but are additionally a source of nitrogen in your diet. They help you build up your own proteins. And then fats are essential forms of energy with their higher caloric 9 calories per gram, whereas proteins are 4 and carbs are 4. But additionally, there are fats present in the digestive tract for vitamin absorption. Because some vitamins can only be absorbed when encased in hydrophobic substances. Additionally, we have things that we call essential nutrients and essential amino acids. Now, this is not the same kind of essential as you get with essential oils, because essential oils are actually not essential for life. They just capture the essence of the plant. In this case, essential nutrients are essential for life. And that's because you need them, but you cannot make them. This means that you have to ingest them. You have to get them from something else. Now, these essential nutrients or essential amino acids can come in the form of amino acids themselves or vitamins, which are coenzymes for reactions, or minerals. And your minerals are actually pieces of amino acids. They're construction components for your amino acids. And there are 11 amino acids that we can make. And there are 9 that we can't. Therefore, those 9 amino acids are our essential amino acids. I'll leave it to your next metabolic biochemistry class to teach you the structure of those amino acids, but if you're interested, you can go ahead and look those up on Wikipedia and see which amino acids you can synthesize inside of you and which you can't. And again, we'll revisit some of the vitamins that can be synthesized in us versus some of the vitamins that can't. Now, you and I, as primates, fall down the lineage of primates that cannot make our own vitamin C. It defines us. It's kind of weird to think about the fact that you are defined by your inability to make a vitamin C inside of you. This means that instead, you must eat it. Thank goodness, because I do love fruit. It's almost like I'm evolved to like the taste of it. I'll end today's lecture by talking about 2 different minerals and two different vitamins. Two different vitamins that you should be aware of. Sorry, we'll keep the minerals off of here. Those will be talked about in your next metabolic biochemistry class. But I want to talk about two vitamins that are essential in your diet that are hydrophilic, so you can eat these and bring them in with water, and two that are fat soluble. Now, two vitamins you might be familiar with are vitamin B3, which is a component of NAD plus and NADP plus. Now, earlier in this class, when we talked about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, we talked about the fact that NAD plus is the one used in cellular respiration. NADP is used in photosynthesis. But I want to burst your bubble again, perhaps overly complicate things, and tell you that you as a human also have NADPH. But you do not use it in cellular respiration. You use it in other metabolic processes. So, vitamin B3 is going to be essential for both of those. Where do you get it? In meats, eggs, grains, nuts, and potatoes. So plants and animal products have it. Vitamin B5 is a component of one of my favorite enzymes in cellular respiration, coenzyme A. Now, in order to get coenzyme A, you're going to eat things that need to perform a lot of cellular respiration, like meat, or our grains, or things that need to feed things that are meant to perform a lot of cellular respiration, like milk, that mammal product that I am quite a big fan of, right? So you get a lot of different sources of vitamin B5, the water-soluble vitamin that goes into making coenzyme A. Now, two fat-soluble vitamins that you absolutely need fat in order to get in are vitamin D, which is critical for calcium absorption for bone development, which certainly makes sense as to why we have vitamin D fortified milk. We only fortify whole milk with vitamin D because it has enough fat to help with the absorption. Vitamin D can also be had from cod liver oil, milks, or that fatty egg yolk. Vitamin D is very, very important in so many different components of our body. Your book lists that it's essential for calcium absorption, maintains the nervous system, maintains the heartbeat, maintains in blood clotting, and the one that it leaves off that I think is absolutely fascinating is its role in immunity. And we're just beginning to uncover some of well, I shouldn't say that. Its role in immunity has been known for quite a long time, but with many diseases, deficiencies of vitamin D can lead to more severe symptoms. That certainly is the case for the COVID-19 pandemic. One of the main predictors of having very strong reactions or very strong symptoms to COVID-19 is a deficiency of vitamin D. So please make sure that you are getting your vitamin D. Vitamin E is another fat-soluble vitamin. You'll oftentimes see vitamin E fortifying lotions. Vitamin E is something that's meant to reduce the oxidative damage, meaning that you are getting it in your cells that are potentially getting a lot of damage from either radiation or other forms of DNA damage. And it also can help prevent lung damage from different pollutants. And again, like vitamin D, it's vital to the immune system. You get it from a lot of things that have high oil content, like wheat seed oil, wheat germ oil, or nuts, or different seeds. Now, you additionally will find the diseases caused by a lack of these vitamins in this box here. And I'd encourage you to explore this table in the textbook. It lists a lot more other vitamins that I'd like for you to at least glance at, but for the purposes of exams in this class or quizzes in this class, I'll only ask you to be familiar with these 4, the 2 water-soluble and the 2 fat-soluble vitamins here. So, please keep all of this information about the nutritional components of our diet, the vitamins, the absorption in the villi and microvilli, all of the enzymes and stages that your food goes through when being absorbed, while you're eating your next meal, which, since you're now done with the lecture, might as well do now.